hit like and subscribe. You're watching the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel.
Peace, family. This is your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold Night School where we break down the most controversial subjects, the most engaged debates, the most contested subjects going on in the world today. And tonight is no different, except we got a little company. Every once in a while, Night School, I like to bring someone in who can have a spirited conversation, especially Thursday nights. It's a lot of fun to have a good debate with someone. But tonight, it's not really a debate. It's more like a conversation. I wanted to talk to someone on the so-called other side of the aisle. It's been well over a month since the election. People have dissected and examined and theorized about all the reasons why Donald Trump won, why Kamala Harris lost. And there are a lot of theories, whether it's Joe Biden's debate performance. Remember that? Feels like a million years ago. Did that seal the fate of the Democratic Party? Is America still not ready for a woman to run the country? Black woman in particular? Is it a political issue? Is it ideological? Or is the majority of the country simply shifting to the right? Are Americans becoming single issue voters? The list goes on and on and on. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. But I can guarantee you, this gentleman has a different take than I do. My guest tonight is a former presidential candidate, former U.S. congressman, and he currently hosts The Social Contract. I love that name, The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Please welcome Joe Walsh. Joe, good to see you.
Hey, Mark, good to be with you from afar. And you and I haven't spoken often. From afar, even though you and I disagree on a lot, I'm a fan of what you do, brother.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really, really, really appreciate that, man. It's so rare these days that people on different sides of the fence can have real conversations without it either looking like a pro wrestling battle between good and evil, or people pretending that there are no legitimate differences. So I like the fact that you're honest, that you're straightforward.
And Mark, two things about you. Like, number one, both you and I at times go on Piers Morgan's show. And I'm getting sick of that format. I'm at a point where I no longer want to do it because it just seems like it's creating this. But then the other compliment I'm going to give you is a former politician. Most people in our business kind of hedge and fudge what they believe. You've always said what you believe, and I've always said what I believe. That's gotten each of us in trouble at times, but I respect that.
No, I appreciate that. Well, that's actually a good place to start. You have run for the presidency. You have put yourself in the line of fire, and you've identified both as Republican at times and as independent at times. Where do you see the Republican Party right now?
Oh, it's gone. It is this, Mark. It's my former party is now MAGA for good. I felt that way a year or two ago. I left the party 5 years ago, but this election made it official. It's a MAGA party. It's going to stay on that road, and it's never going to change, not in my lifetime.
When you say that, I don't disagree. How does that happen? How does a party make that kind of shift? I remember even in my lifetime, people, and I didn't agree with them, obviously, but there were people who were Reagan Democrats. There were people who, in a given election, made a choice about who they were going to vote for. And Democrats and Republicans weren't so vastly or wildly different, both in terms of policy and also in terms of sort of comportment, in terms of some of the ideological stuff. It just didn't seem like such a different choice. Now, again, for me, the reason I'm a Green Party member is because I think that the Democrats are too conservative, and I think we have two right-wing parties. But when did the Republicans become so different, and why?
Well, and by the way, you make a great point. I think the whole system's broken. I think both parties are broken. I wish we had 3 parties, 4 parties, 5 parties. So we're like living in this populist moment where our politics is broken. Trump's a populist. I think he's an evil populist, but he's a populist. So Trump was right about one thing, Mark. The Republican Party establishment was super, super weak from the very beginning. And to understand what happened to my party, you got to know like the base of my party, primarily middle-aged and older white people. And these middle-aged and older white people for a long time have been watching their country changing like in a nanosecond. And the establishment ignored these people. And then, Mark, along came Tea Party people like me, and we inflamed them. And we got them all wound up. So, like, we set the perfect storm for a demagogue like Trump to say, fuck it, I'm going to build a wall. I'll keep brown and black people out. And from that moment on, it became a cult, and they were tied to him.
How much of, in your estimation, was the Tea Party formation a response to Barack Obama?
Some, no doubt some. I remind people constantly that the Tea Party began before Obama. Like the Tea Party got pissed about George W. Bush's bailouts and all the spending. And Mark, I got into the Tea. It's like there were two parts of the Tea Party. One was all about government spending, and then there was the uglier side of it. And I saw some of it early, and I didn't pay enough attention to it because I was driven by the government spending. But when we didn't do shit about government spending when we went to Washington, then you saw some of the uglier aspects, some of the anti-Obama stuff that came out.
And is it that Trump seized a moment and said, look, these are some vulnerable white people, let me exploit their fears? Or is that even too, am I being too earnest even in saying that? Was something more nefarious at play?
No, look, Mark, I think you're right. I think like the Tea Party led to Trump. People like me led to Trump. We went to Washington mostly to cut spending. We didn't do it because the Republican Party sucks on spending. So when we let our base down, then Trump realized, I'm going to tap into the uglier part of the Tea Party. I'm going to tap into the other stuff that the base is concerned about. The fact that America's no longer like a Christian country and we're becoming less white by the day, and we have got open borders and you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. Trump tapped into the cultural stuff.
That cultural stuff seemed to win out. And I think where I struggle is believing that there are all of these well-intentioned people who just cared about spending, who just cared about fiscal responsibility, who somehow got swept into the Trump cult. It seems easier for a lot of us to believe, myself included, to believe that the overwhelming majority of those Tea Party people already they'd already bought into the cultural stuff. It may not have been their priority issue for voting, but they were already bought in hook, line, and sinker. And Trump gave them an excuse to be who they already were.
Yes, that's true, Mark. They from the very beginning of the Tea Party, they bought into the spending stuff, the debt, and the cultural stuff was there too. Both those things were there. I can just tell you, being part of the movement from the earliest days, 80-90% of what I talked about we're bankrupting future generations, the debt. That's what kind of the Tea Party led with. You're right. There was this undercurrent that people like me didn't pay enough attention to. And again, once we didn't deliver on any of the spending stuff, then this other shit that you identified, Mark, it was always there.
Yeah.
Then it came out.
When you say you didn't pay enough attention to it, and this is a question I always try to have. I worked at Fox News, and people always say to me, didn't you hear the racist stuff? Didn't you hear the racism? And the answer, honestly, is no, right? I mean, those conversations weren't had in front of me. I saw the explicitly racist stuff and the subtext and all the stuff that on TV that everybody else saw, but behind the scenes, people were fairly ordinary.
Yeah.
I would argue even liberal. It seemed like they were liberal in the newsroom and conservative on air. So I always wondered, like, are there conversations happening that just aren't in my earshot? When you're in these meetings for the Tea Party, and the Tea Party is becoming MAGA, that conversion period, you're talking fiscal spending. What are they talking?
Yeah. By that time, Mark, we were like two ships passing in the night, because I'm still railing about spending, but Trump's already said, I'm going to build a wall and we're going to keep certain people out. And I could watch all of my voters and all of my audience, because at the time Trump got elected, Mark, I was on right-wing talk radio all over the country, and I kept wanting to rail about spending and debt, and I could see I was losing my audience every single day with Trump as he emphasized this other stuff. And the most successful guys in my right-wing radio biz followed Trump and latched onto that stuff. I just couldn't do it. But you're right. It was moving in that direction.
Does Donald Trump believe this stuff?
Fuck no. well, like, what do I know, Mark? You probably know as well as I do. I don't think Trump believes in anything but Trump. I think he only cares about one thing, and that's Trump. He's a vehicle. He's transactional. He doesn't care about any of this stuff.
So that's interesting. So I've been told that by lots of Trump supporters, including those who defend him against allegations of racism. What they'll say is Trump's not racist. His supporters are, but he's not. I struggle with that, right? Because there's a part of me that believes that's absolutely true. I don't know if Donald Trump closes his door at night and says racist shit. I mean, he might, right? I think he's probably as racist as any old white guy, right? You know, I don't think he's particularly uniquely racist, but the fact that he's willing to foment racism and enable racism and leverage racism to be president both times, to me says something too, right? What, you know, you have to kind of be pretty racist to do that. On some level, I mean, like, do you get what I mean? Like, how do you situate him ideologically or personally at that level, at the conversation of racism?
Look, it's so weird, Mark, because he's such a horrible human being, and I mean that. I publicly turned against Trump 6 years ago. I voted for him in 2016, but I publicly turned against him 6 years ago, and then I lost my right-wing career. But he's a lawless, un-American psychopath. He's only capable of caring about himself. So because he's so bad, it's easy to just say, oh, he's not racist. He's a jerk to everybody. But no,
right. That's the argument.
No, bullshit. I know people who know him, who've heard him say racist shit. He says racist shit that like my grandfather's generation would have said about black or brown people. So I think that's there too.
Wow. Can you share any of that stuff?
No. I mean, no. And again, only because it's hearsay. It's stuff that people told me they heard him say. But I have no doubt, and you have no doubt, that in private over the years, my God, he talks the way an 80-year-old white guy would have talked.
Wow. I mean, and that's important to remember, that he basically is an 80-year-old white guy, give or take a few years.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of this. When the question is asked, who is Donald Trump? You say he's a terrible human being. It's hard to be president without being a terrible human being. It's hard to be a billionaire without being a terrible human being. Is he that different than the other people who've come before him?
Oh, heck yeah. Like, you and I may disagree on this. You got to have a healthy ego to be president. Barack Obama has a healthy ego. I don't think he was a terrible human being. George H.W. Bush, probably a healthy ego. I don't think George H.W. was a terrible human being. Donald Trump, Mark, again, look, Joe Biden has a problem with the truth. Most politicians have a problem with the truth. A former politician. I always tried to say what I believe, but most politicians lie, fudge, and hedge.
Yes.
Trump lies damn near every time he speaks. Really. Donald Trump's the only president in our history who lost an election and refused to accept that result. And then I believe he committed crimes to try to overthrow it. No other president, Kamala Harris, she lost. The next day, she publicly conceded. Hillary Clinton, the next day after she lost, publicly conceded. No, Trump is like the worst of, he's in a league all by himself, I think.
Do Republicans hate him behind the scenes?
Mark, that's a fucking great question. So if you would have asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said most don't. Because when I came out against Trump publicly 6 years ago, most of my former colleagues would contact me privately and say, Joe, God, I agree with everything you're saying, but I can't say that publicly. So 4 years ago, if you look like at Republicans in the House, probably 65, 70% of them were cynical. They didn't think, they hated Trump, but they just bowed down to him because he was the leader. And there were maybe 30% of Republicans in the House were Marjorie Taylor Greene, true believer crazies.
Yes.
Mark, 4 years later, there's about 65% of House Republicans are now true believing crazies. Honest, that's shifted. Most of them now are total full-on MAGA.
So it's not so much that it's not that politicians feel differently about Trump. It's that a new wave of politicians have come in on the wave of Trump, on the wings of Trump, sort of, who are Kool-Aid drinking MAGA.
Yeah.
Crazy people.
Because that's where the base, remember, that's where the base is. Like, the media's always gotten it wrong. These Republicans in Congress, they've never been afraid of Trump. They've always been afraid of their base voters because Trump owns them. He's got a lock on them. So to win a Republican primary, man, you got to be MAGA.
Wow. And do you see that changing when Trump's gone? I hear you say the party's MAGA for the foreseeable future, but without Trump there, and I get he's a cult of personality, but I mean, we saw DeSantis, not a lot of personality there. We saw Nikki Haley. I think she's a very gifted politician and probably would have made a great vice president. If and maybe even at the top of the ticket could have been an interesting choice. I'm not sure she can command the Republican Party as a woman, as a brown woman. I don't know if there's an heir apparent. I don't know if there's anyone who can galvanize the MAGAs again.
Well, I'll answer that two ways, Mark. And again, there's been a failure of imagination with Trump. Like 20 years ago, nobody would have imagined that an American president loses an election and then tries to overthrow the election. So I say that, Mark, only to say that it's not out of the realm of possibility that Trump will try to run again. I mean that. But let's assume he doesn't, right? Because the Constitution says he can't.
Right.
But here's the deal. There's no fucking way Nikki Haley could win a Republican primary for president in 2020. If not Trump, it's going to be the Trumpiest guy out there. You're right that DeSantis had zero personality, but he'd be in the running. The base loves J.D. Vance. And Mark, I'm telling you, if Tucker Carlson wanted to run for the Republican nomination, the base loves him. There's no room for Nikki Haley's or Mitt Romney's or anybody like that, not for the foreseeable future.
Wow. You said something that I don't want to abandon. How likely is it that Donald Trump will leave office?
I say, Mark, again, what do I know? I say it's 50-50. I mean that. Yeah. I say it's 50-50. There's a 50% chance that he would try to stay in office and run again. They're already joking about it. They joke about it, Bannon and all these others, because they're planting that seed with his base.
Is this all just a certainly reasonable fear, but is this all just a fear of Trump based on who he is? Or is there something substantive behind the scenes that Trump has said? Is there some indication? Is there some murmur that should make us that makes us a credible fear beyond just Trump being Trump?
Yeah, I think it's a credible fear because it goes beyond Trump. Trump talks about it, jokes about it. I think if Trump were 10 to 15 years younger, I think he'd do it no matter what. But the other thing that I worry about, Mark, is rank and file military members, rank and file law enforcement, rank and file people in the FBI or the Justice Department. A lot of these folks are really conservative. I say that as a conservative. A lot of these folks are Trumpers. I'm a big pro-cop guy, and I talk to cops all the time. Rank and file cops love Trump. So I worry that there are other people institutionally who would try to help Trump to make that happen.
It's interesting. There are a lot of people who argue the opposite, and I found it persuasive. And I'm obviously not a big cop guy. I'm the exact opposite of that. Yeah. But I cops like law and order. They believe in it. That's their thing. That's their jam, right? Military people love chain of command. I get he's the commander in chief, but the moment someone else wins the election, I just assume that no general, that no high-ranking official would go along with Trump because they believe in this idea of American democracy being peaceful transitions of power. That when Trump goes, "Who's coming with me?" Yeah, there'd be the nutsos that rushed the Capitol January 6th, but that the actual officials and military folk wouldn't fall in line. Am I being naive again?
No, I don't think you're being naive. I think you're being hopeful, and I respect that. But look, rank and file cops and rank and file military reflect the Republican Party base. They really do. And we're not talking about Trump losing another election and then staying. This is a weird one because we're talking about Trump maybe trying to defy the Constitution and running again. So if Trump came out in a year and a half and said, "Fuck it, I'm going to run again," I think there'd be more support than we think institutionally. That scares me.
That's a great point. It's not like before when it was like, "Oh, what if he loses?" No, that's a great, and that's where my mind was actually. You're right. I mean, he's arranged the Supreme Court, and he has the Congress right now. I mean, how soon would we imagine Trump working on something where he could get a third term?
It would be within the next year and a half. He and his people midway through 2025 would get more serious about it instead of just kind of joking about it. They put it out there consistently to make sure, because remember, there's no Republican in the House or Senate who would defy him. None.
Even on this issue?
Even on this. Oh God, yeah, Mark. And that's why, by the way, you and me, brother, and I'm not a Democrat. I worked my ass off to try to help get Kamala Harris elected. The most important thing we can do is make sure the Democrats take back the House in 2026.
Here's where I lose my. I think I know what you're going to say, but my thought is, I get why people were scared of Trump. They're like, it's like, from The Wire, you come for the king, you best not miss. Like, if I come for Trump and lose, I mean, DeSantis is now on everybody's shit list because he tried to defeat Trump and lost, right? And so there are a lot of people who will never forgive him for even attempting to run against Trump unless Trump forgives him. I get that, but if
by the way, Mark, that's changed. I still talk to the base every single day. Yeah. DeSantis has reformed. He's healed his reputation because after he got out, he became a good, loyal soldier. He endorsed Trump, and behind the scenes, he did a lot to help Trump. So his rating in the base is pretty high again.
Fair enough. That's helpful. But all of that speaks to the idea that they're afraid of Trump because of what Trump can do if they don't kill him, if they don't actually kill the giant.
Yeah.
If I'm a Republican in the Congress right now, if I'm in the House or the Senate, I'm thinking, well, let's do everything we can to bury him. We hold the keys to this third term. We hold the keys to this unprecedented future. If we don't let him win, then he's just an 81-year-old, former president. I mean, what's he going to do to us? All right, his power is in the possibility of being president.
Well, that then that raises the question. I believe if Trump doesn't run and he goes away and he comes out in 2 years and says, I can't run again, the nominee will be whoever Trump endorses. So even if Trump's a lame duck and he doesn't run again, even 5 years from now, Donald Trump will still hold so much sway over the base, and they will all go to him for that endorsement. So even no longer as an active politician, Mark, he's a cult leader. He really is.
Was this?
By the way, the Democratic Party has real issues, but the Democratic Party is not an anti-democratic thing. That's what MAGA is. They got their own issues, as you're aware of.
Absolutely. I want to pivot to something else, but before we do, what would we be surprised? And to be clear, my audience here is a left-wing audience.
Yeah.
Most of us are left of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Just for context, what would we be surprised to know Republicans talk about behind the scenes?
That's such a good question. That's a really good question. There's still plenty of chatter behind the scenes negative about Trump. So that's still there. It's now a minority of Republicans, but it's privately a loud. Look, Mark, most Republicans wanted Trump to lose again. They wanted him to lose I'm talking about elected officials.
Yeah.
They wanted him to lose in 2020 because they wanted him gone. Even most this time still wanted him to lose, though they wouldn't say that publicly, because the establishment of the party wants to be able to move beyond him. And they've never understood from the beginning that that's never going to happen.
Why do they want to move beyond him? If they're so successful at getting their agenda advanced through him, why do they care?
Because it's an agenda that the establishment doesn't like. Like the establishment is still tax cuts for the rich. We bow down at the feet of big business. We engage internationally. I'm not a neocon. You and I may differ on some foreign policy stuff, but the establishment still likes the U.S. to be involved everywhere around the world. Trump's brought a lot of people to the party who don't believe in any of that stuff.
I see. And that goes back to he doesn't have an actual ideology. He's sort of.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question coming in from the audience that I want to take. It's from Bullet the Bunny. She says, answer me this. Why is Biden still president? Does anyone think his mind is not mud? We've just run the clock. I'll ask it slightly differently.
Yeah.
Although I don't disagree with anything she just said. Is Joe Biden mentally stable and healthy?
Probably not. No. And Mark, I haven't heard you speak on this, but my God, he stuck around too long, and shame on Joe Biden. Shame on Joe Biden. Joe Biden put himself before the country. Jill Biden did as well. Joe Biden should have come out in 2022 and said, damn it, I'm going to be that bridge. I'm done. Have at it, Democrats. By the way, Mark, I don't blame Kamala Harris for losing. I think she did a lot right. I blame Joe Biden a lot.
I think so. I blame both of them.
Yeah.
And we can talk because it goes into our Israel conversation where I suspect we'll disagree a lot. But I think Joe Biden did Kamala Harris no favors by waiting.
Yeah.
Giving that awful debate performance certainly didn't help. Young people, college students, left-wing folk, brown folk, Muslims. I mean, I can name a whole group of people who were just incredibly frustrated and even alienated by Joe Biden's campaign and presidency, even particularly in the last year. And yet handing that thing off sooner than later probably would have been better. I'm not sure if Kamala Harris does better if she has more time. The argument is always, oh, she only had 107 days. I don't know if 207 days makes her more likely to be president or less likely to be president. It seemed like the more the country got to know her, the less interested they were in her being president. Is that the wrong way to think about it?
Disagrees with that because I campaigned with her and I watched her grow. I wasn't real high on her as a candidate, obviously, the first time around. I don't think Biden did her any powers because I don't think Biden empowered her as vice president. I wish he had done more of that, but I watched her grow over the campaign. But I think I agree with you that even with more time, there were basic things that people were pissed off about that the Democratic Party just didn't talk to. And so they went with the bullshit artist who at least talked about that stuff.
He talked about it. He's like, oh, I'll lower the price of groceries. Then he wins. He's like, oh, those,
yeah,
you want me to do more groceries?
They're fucking eating cats and dogs. All bullshit, all a lie. But he talked about the problem of our broken immigration system, and Dems just didn't talk about it for too long.
Let me ask you a question. You campaigned with Kamala Harris, as you just said. Did she think she was going to win?
Did she think she was going to win?
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. And you get in a bubble. Like, I've run for office. You get in a bubble, but it was like, and Mark, there was a part of me, even though I knew that there was this populist anger out there, I still thought, and I had people around Harris who said to me directly, Joe, I get it. People are pissed about immigration and the economy, the price of eggs, but there's no fucking way at the end of the day, they're going to send that horrible guy back to Washington. So I think they believed that protected them. And I think she believed a lot of that. And that, by the way, Mark, the biggest mistake she made was not putting herself out there in front of everybody from day one. She should have gone on with Joe Rogan the first week she was a candidate, get in front of idiots like Tucker Carlson, go everywhere. But they tried to protect her because they thought Trump's a bad guy and that'll carry us.
I mean, the whole "at least I'm not him" strategy worked for Biden. So I get why, but Biden's also an old white guy. And a more seasoned politician and someone that people trusted. And there was a pandemic. I mean, there were a lot of factors here.
Yes.
Do you think America would have voted for ultimately a Black woman under any circumstance?
That's a great question. And you're asking a Tea Party guy, still proud Tea Party guy from the right. I think yes, but I think there are Americans who won't. And that is an obstacle that a woman has, and that is an obstacle that a woman of color would have. I think most Americans would, but there is a minority of Americans that would never. So that's a hurdle a woman of color would have to get over. Mark, I had too many conversations with, weirdly, you know this better than I do, like Black men, Latino men, Arab men, who spoke about, who would tell me directly a woman shouldn't be in charge. Like I heard that on the trail plenty.
That and you know, that's my fear, right? There's always the white guy in our kind of imagination who we say, the Archie Bunker of the world, who's like, I'm not doing that, right? But it's not the Archie Bunker that I worry about, because Democrats don't win presidencies by getting the majority of white people. You know, white people never vote for. I mean, white people don't vote for Democrats, right? And the majority of white people don't vote Democrat, right? In this country, it's the George Jeffersons that also won't vote for Kamala Harris. And if you get that combo where the one thing they agree on is that a woman shouldn't be president, and God forbid a Black woman, I'm not sure that there's a chance. And so then that puts you in a really weird spot as a party, because if the logic is a Black woman can't win. Even if we accept that logic, at least at this juncture in history, then we're also reinforcing the racism by saying we're never going to nominate a Black woman, even if she's qualified.
Well, bingo. But I guess I don't buy that. I don't buy the premise. I think a Black woman could win. I think if Kamala Harris ran again, she could win. I think. Look, I know, like we're all messed up because he won again, but he didn't win by a lot. He won by about 230,000 votes again in 3 states. So it was, with all the handicaps that she had, it was almost a tie again. He didn't get 50% of the vote.
Wait, go ahead. Pull that up. That doesn't sound right. The popular vote,
could be wrong on that, but he was down to 49.4% of the vote. 49 point.
Yeah, I'm looking now at the latest number I see is 49.9. So fair enough. I guess he technically didn't get the majority. It's just he won by 2.3 million votes and he dominated the electoral map.
Well, right. But he dominated because he swept all the states. But he only won by like 270,000 votes. If she had flipped 270,000 votes in the battleground states, she would have gotten.
I see what you mean. Okay. I see what you
mean. And by the way, Mark, you and I probably agree on this. You are a far left guy. I'm a far right guy. The Electoral College is fucked up because so many Democrats didn't vote. The only reason Trump won the popular vote is because the Democratic vote in California, New York, and Illinois, my state, was way, way down. They didn't even bother to vote because it didn't matter.
Yeah, that's
fucked up.
Yeah. I'm baffled by this. I mean, it's you raise a really interesting question. I'm not sure she could possibly have done any different no matter what the arrangement was. I mean, again, we've seen what Donald Trump could do. We see who he is. And I know there was the narrative that the economy was tanked and he's the only one who could bring it back, and that she was talking about the wrong issues and he was speaking to the bread and butter issues. That just felt like, to me, an excuse.
Mark, I'll tell you one thing she could have done that might have won her the campaign. I forget when it was, but she's on The View and she's asked that question. Is there anything you differ with Joe Biden, disagree with? And she fumbled. She kind of said, no, nothing. If she had said something like, and this was in mid-September, if she had said, you know what? We didn't, our immigration system's broken, and we did a lousy job addressing the situation at the border. We waited too long. I wish we had gotten more proactive earlier and tried to fix our asylum system and all of that. If she had said something to distinguish herself from Biden on one major issue, it could have mattered, and she just wouldn't go there.
Just throw him under the bus.
Well,
I mean, this is what you got to do, right? I mean, that's a fancy way of saying throw him under the bus, especially if she's the border czar.
Well, I know, but that whole border czar thing was screwed up because she really wasn't put in charge of the border. She was put in charge of talking to Central American countries. But I get your point. I get your point.
She would have to say that. I wasn't really the border czar. If I were, this. I mean, again.
Yeah, they ain't working.
Right.
But no, yeah, throw Biden under the bus, but you're not Joe Biden. You guys messed up on the border at the beginning. You did. Acknowledge that. I don't know. That's just one example. But if she couldn't articulate one difference with Biden, and she never really did, that's a problem.
I agree. So one area where I think, and this is again coming at it from the other perspective, where she could have made a difference was on the question of Gaza.
Yeah.
There were, I mean, if you look in Pennsylvania, if you look in Michigan, I mean, there were lots of places where people said, hey, a different stance on Gaza is needed. There were a lot of people who said that they would be a lot more likely to vote for Kamala Harris if she supported a ceasefire, if she supported an embargo, if she said, I mean, a ceasefire and an embargo were popular prospects, popular initiatives, particularly among Democrats and likely Democratic voters. There were lots of people who said they'd be more likely to vote for Kamala Harris if she took a more humane and principled stance on Gaza vis-a-vis ceasefire, weapons embargo, etc. And again, she could have separated herself from Joe Biden. I'm not saying she actually sees this any differently than Joe Biden, but maybe she should have. I don't think she actually gives a damn about fracking, but she took a position that she thought would be attractive to the base. Here, she took a very different. She made a very different choice. She said, "I'm not. Basically, give me a chance." She gets the baton, and there were a lot of people who, on my platform, myself included, who were absolutely not going to vote for Joe Biden because of this issue. And a lot of people, myself included, said, let's give her a shot. I'm talking about before she even chose a running mate.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I was pushing her so hard not to choose Shapiro, and both publicly and behind the scenes pushing them, do not get Josh Shapiro. I had at least 4 reasons for that. But one of them was, you'll immediately be put back into Biden territory on this Israel-Palestine issue. When she didn't choose Shapiro, it wasn't about choosing Walls, it was about not choosing Shapiro. People said, hey, maybe she's different. Maybe she's, they looked at her not speaking to Netanyahu or not meeting Netanyahu when he gave his joint, his joint speech, and said before the Congress and said, hey, maybe there's something there. We were looking for reasons to just give me something. And Joe, instead, she shut down protesters in Michigan and said, I am speaking. She eventually said that she was that there would never be an embargo. She wouldn't support an embargo, or at least her people said that. And she kept reiterating Israel's right to defend itself as this it was almost like a tick at some point. She just kept saying that whenever anyone asked a complicated, nuanced, or maybe not so complicated question about a genocide, she just kept saying Israel has the right to defend itself. And so I feel like, to me, that's why she lost Michigan. That's why she lost Pennsylvania. And suddenly those couple 100,000 votes that you're talking about were gone. I know that was a very long setup, but what do you make of that?
Mark, this is such a fascinating topic because I take the complete opposite stance. And sometime I'll come back and let you and I have a good, respectful, tough conversation about Israel, because this is one issue where you and I are on complete opposite sides, but we could still have a great conversation. But politically, Mark, I get that in a Democratic look, Israel-Gaza, it's an issue that divides the Democratic coalition. Fair enough. And in a Democratic primary, it's probably helpful to be more pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian. But man, you're running in a general election and you got to appeal to people across the board. And this is principally a pro-Israel country. I think if she had come out and been to the left of Biden on that issue, I think she'd have been smoked because there would have been so many moderate voters who would have just said to hell with it. And I even talked to so many Democratic Jewish voters who hated Trump, who ended up voting for Trump because they didn't think she was strong enough with Israel. So it's a good question.
And that's why I completely lose not my mind, but I get baffled. I heard this. I heard she's anti-Semitic. I heard she's not pro-Israel. I mean, Trump said that a lot. She's not pro-Israel. At one point, Trump said she hates Israel. Forget that she's married to a Jewish man, although I think that's important. Forget that she was literally collecting money to grow trees in Israel since she was a kid. I mean, I've had private conversations with Kamala Harris. The last conversation I had with Kamala Harris on the phone was on this issue. She said, "I'll call you right back." I haven't heard back. I don't think that you could have a more pro-Israel position than Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, or I think Democrats and Republicans, sadly, are equally pro-Israel on this thing. So,
I agree. I think I guess part of the problem with her, Mark, is like you and I knew where Biden was on Israel. And from your perspective, he was probably too pro-Israel. From my perspective, he wasn't pro-Israel enough. But, Biden had a history. But it's like people didn't know Kamala's history on that issue. And this was part of her problem, Mark, was it was never really fleshed out where she stood on a lot of issues. To your point, as a good, sincere guy on the left, she moved to the middle the minute she got the nomination. She used people like me, Republicans for Harris, me and Liz Cheney out there on the trail with her. That probably didn't endear her to her progressive base, right?
No, it bothered me.
Yeah.
It bothered me.
I get it.
She would do that. I mean, I get that you and Liz and
I get it.
At some point, Dick Cheney, Karl Rove. It was like, okay, we get it. You're moving to the right.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of us on the left who are asking you to give us a reason to vote for you. And she says, more Republicans. She says, more right-wing policy. It's like, it was weird to me.
I hear it.
I get the argument of saying, hey, look, I want to show you, particularly as a Democrat Black woman who's been called crazy, extremist, left wing. all that stuff. She's just trying to say, look, they like me over here. They trust me. If Dick Cheney trusts me, like that should say something.
And Mark, by the way, to support your point, and I bet you and I agree on this, back in 2016, if Bernie were the Democratic nominee, because Bernie was a populist, Bernie was outside the system. That's what America wants. That's part of Trump's appeal. So I do agree with you. And even though I'm not a man on the left, a leftist populist I think would have more success than just kind of a corporate candidate like Kamala, and you don't really know where she is.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right. So I only got you for a few more minutes. I got to ask you. I know we'll have a full conversation later. But
Don't you dare start it.
I got to at least ask you, why are you pro-Israel?
I think, again, we can't start it. I just, look, I love life. I love peace. I want everybody to live in peace. I think Israel's like a miracle. I think Israel stands for all that's good. And I know Israel has always believed in peace. They want to live side by side with Arabs and Muslims and blah, 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 all God's children. I just think Israel is entrepreneurial. It's about freedom. It's about loving everybody. I think it's a gift to humanity. But Mark, don't start yet. We'll get into it.
You literally have me here about to either. I was deciding whether I should fling myself off this chair or whether I should kill myself with this back scratcher.
Tell me, all right, but answer me this, Mark, and then we'll stop it and we will continue it one day. Tell me, educate me, what is your principal criticism of Israel? And go and just say what you feel.
Okay. I'll give you my abbreviated 60, maybe 90-second version.
Do it. Fire away, my friend.
I would disagree with every let me change the subheading before I answer this.
And we will have a conversation about this because I think it's so important. I just pissed off your whole audience. I apologize.
They were already pissed off. Don't worry. They already anticipated your response. So I think you met their expectations.
Should you fire away? Give me your 60-second thesis.
Here's the argument. One, I don't think Israel is a miracle any more than the United States or Australia or New Zealand are miracles, right? It would be a miracle if they somehow were able to create a democratic nation without oppressing people, without exploiting or displacing people. But Israel is a nation that was formed on the dispossession of Palestinian people, on land theft, on death, on removal of people, on expulsion, on literally burning down hundreds of villages, on denying and defying international law. There's over 100 years of oppression of Palestinian people that produces in Israel the idea that people could form a nation or already have a nation and create a nation state for themselves to be free of oppression. I like, but you can't jump out of the burning buildings of Europe or Yemen or Egypt or wherever and land on the backs of Palestinian people. I have no issue with sharing land. I have no issue with people finding land and finding freedom. But Israel is not a project of sharing land. It's not a project of democracy. It's a project of exclusivity. Israel is a nation that is an ethno state. It's unfortunately Jewish supremacy. And so their liberation and freedom is coming at the expense of other people. And it would be like me telling a Native American here that America is a miracle. I couldn't look at a Native American here and say, look how amazing this democratic nation is. It would be awful.
And Mark, I really appreciate your perspective. Let me ask you one quick question, because then we're done. And we'll continue this. Do you think peace is possible in the Middle East?
I think peace is possible anywhere, but I think that there are two problems. One, as Gil Scott-Heron said from The Last Poets, everybody loves peace. Problem is, can't make no money off of it. There's too much investment in the military. There's too much investment in weaponry. There's too much investment in all of these deals, whether it's the Abraham Accords or whatever. Historically, there's just been too much money. The U.S.'s special relationship with Israel begins with with weapon sales. If you think about the Kennedy era, I mean, it's peace is possible, but there's no peace where there's capitalism. But then the other piece of that is, justice has to be a precondition for peace. There will never be peace as long as there's injustice. And so unless there is a fair resolution to Israel-Palestine, and I don't care what that is. It's not for me to decide. I don't think it's for you to decide. I think it's but whatever that is, until that happens, there won't be peace. And there shouldn't be peace.
And this is a great place to end, because you very concisely gave me your viewpoint, and that helps me. You said there can't be peace without injustice. And I hear that. That's interesting. I would say there can't be peace, and don't you come back after me, because we'll continue this. There can't be peace as long as one side, I would argue, the Palestinian side, just doesn't believe the other side has a right to exist. Until that changes, you'll never have peace.
Yeah, you're gonna have to come back on that one.
Stop.
You don't believe that. You don't.
I do. But we'll continue this.
You got to promise to come back, so then I can completely destroy that argument.
Well, I want to come back. I don't do debates, but I have conversations, but tough conversations.
Yeah,
tough conversations.
Yeah. The debate.
I hate debating.
It's tired. I mean,
and again, for your audience, this is why I just fucking respect someone like you, because you fervently believe in your beliefs and you'll back them up. And I respect people like that.
So then come on back in. You have an open invite, and we'll come back in, and we'll have that discussion. In the meantime, tell people again where they can find you.
Anywhere, like Twitter, anywhere, at Walsh Freedom. Just look for at Walsh Freedom. My podcast is The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Mark, love it. This was fun. I'd come back anytime.
That sounds like a plan, y'all. Everybody at Walsh Freedom on all social media platforms. Check out his show. It's interesting. It's engaging. It's honest. And you can curse.
Thanks, Mark.
See you soon. So that was Joe Walsh, y'all. Make sure you check out his show. If you're interested in contacting him on social media, again, use at Walsh Freedom. And again, his show's called The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Sometimes people who are hosts for a living think, they control conversations in ways that they don't even realize. I don't think he had any ill intent. And he's like, no, this is what it is. I was like, yeah, this ain't your show, bro. But I'm going to pick up where he left off, and it's my fault. I probably should have gotten to Israel faster. I thought we had a little more time. I thought we had like maybe another 8 minutes or so. But it's all good. I would like him to come back to just talk about that. And again, not as a debate, as a conversation. I think that's the important part. I think it's important to have conversations. Joe's a nice guy. A genuinely nice guy. And every conversation doesn't have to be this. What I wanted to do was get a genuine honest Republican perspective on what's happening behind the scenes, how people are thinking about things, how they saw Kamala Harris, how they understand this Trump moment that's about to come in. And I think he gave us that. I just think he's wrong. I think he is completely wrong on the Israel question. Zakiya, I think he will come back. I think he will come back. I actually think it might be better to just talk about Israel. Now, in fairness, when we invited him, we did tell him initially that we would be talking about Israel. I think that may have been the only thing we told him we'd be talking about. I made the decision to talk about a few issues, 3 issues. I cut one of them, which was the DEI conversation, because I didn't think it would be helpful, because I don't think Joe. I think Joe and I agree on that issue enough, and I think his insights are useful, but not that different than a Democrat on those. And so we've heard that. So I wanted to get his unique insight, and he offered some. And we do Israel debates here all the time. I'm not always convinced that me arguing with someone about Israel changes the game. With Joe, I think it'd be interesting, similar to when Xavier came on last week, because I do believe I do believe that there are some people who are movable on this issue. And someone with millions of followers and millions of listeners, I think, is movable, and it's worth trying to move them on this issue. And so that's why I would be willing to have the conversation with Joe Walsh in the same way that I was willing to have that conversation with Xavier DeRousseau, because I didn't want, maybe I can stop him from making TikTok videos. I'm talking about Xavier, maybe I can make him stop spreading these Hasbara reports and such. And so that's where I like to that's where I like to sort of arrive in the conversation, and why I like to arrive in the conversation. Bill Williamson said, "Good convo. I wish Israel brought up sooner." Agreed. Again, I understand why you would say that. Wanker Tanker said, "Not a right to exist as an ethno state." I think that's an important piece. That's where I was about to go, and thank you for that cue. His whole point is, one side doesn't believe the other has a right to exist. We need to unpack constantly, y'all. And we're here at night school, so I'm gonna do it right now. Again, I don't need the other guest here for me to talk. That's the other thing. I was like, when Joe leaves, I can still, deal with some of this stuff. Don't get boxed into the right to exist conversation. Don't let people convince you that you have to concede that Israel has a right to exist without a real critical conversation, without some clarifying questions. You have to be able to have that conversation. But since the late 70s, early 80s, it has become a kind of shibboleth of American political discourse, maybe just Western political discourse, that Israel has a right to exist. And no one ever says what they mean by that. When you talk about the right to exist, let's strip that down. Let's go beneath the layers there. Do people who live in Israel have a right to exist? Yes, absolutely. Everybody who lives in Israel has a right to exist. Just like everybody who lives in Palestine has a right to exist. Just like everybody who lives in Sudan has a right to exist. Just like everybody who lives in Des Moines, Iowa has a right to exist. Everybody has a right to exist everywhere. To be human is to have a right to exist. So that's not in dispute. No one is saying that Israelis don't have a right to exist as human beings. Israelis have the same right to exist that I do. People who live in Israel have the same right to exist that I do. That's not in dispute. But if it's not in dispute, and most people would say it's not, why is it necessary to assert Israel's right to exist? Well, because they're not talking about the people, they're talking about the country. They're saying that Israel has the right to exist. So now the question becomes a philosophical one, and to some extent a legal one. Do countries have a right to exist? Do nation states have a right to exist? I would argue, no. People have a right to exist, not countries. And if someone were to say that's not true, I would say, well, let's push a little bit on that. Because if you were to walk up to somebody and say, does Israel have a right to exist? And they say, oh, yes, absolutely. I'd die for Israel has a right to exist. I would give my life to assert Israel's right to exist. You ask that same person, does China have a right to exist? Does Iran have a right to exist? Does Cuba have a right to exist? Does Haiti have a right to exist? Does Venezuela have a right to exist? Does Saudi Arabia have a right to exist? Just start naming countries. They'll do one of two things. They'll either say, yes, every country has a right to exist. All right. Then my question becomes, well, if every country has a right to exist, why are we uniquely pointing out Israel's right to exist? Why is it, you don't hear anyone ever say America has a right to exist, Canada has a right to, we only say it about Israel. Now, someone would say Israel is the only country whose existence is called into question. Put a pin on that. I'll return to that because that's not a bad counter argument, but I'll tell you why it doesn't hold up. More likely than not, the people who say who assert Israel's right to exist so aggressively, those people more often than not don't die on the same philosophical hill for those other nation states. Let's dig a little more, though. When they talk about Israel's right to exist, they're not simply saying that the country shouldn't be attacked. Because again, if we're just talking about existential threats, again, to attack a country is to attack the people in the country, right? If I bomb, your country or his country or her country or my country, effectively those people aren't safe. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about something else. And this is where the right to exist discourse gets confused or confusing. In the 1960s, particularly around 1967, when people said Israel has a right to exist, they were talking about respecting Israel's borders, whatever those are, right? They're still not, Israel doesn't really have established borders, but you get what I'm saying. It was about territorial integrity. Territorial integrity. This isn't my language. This is the language of the UN resolutions. So go and read UN Resolution 242, and also you could read UN Resolution 338. And what you see in both of those, which emerged after the 1967 war, is to say, look, the fighting stops, and you have to respect the borders, right? Give people their land back, respect people's borders, and stop bombing shit to all parties involved. That's what the right to exist meant, right? You have to acknowledge that Israel's here and you can't bomb it. You can't disrespect its borders. That was what the right to exist meant at that time. That's why when you see video footage of Martin Luther King saying Israel has a right to exist, that's what he's talking about. He's saying, yeah, like you can't pretend it's here. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with what happened in 1948 or not, whether you agree with the formation of Israel, it's here. The right to exist is what was being alluded to at that moment. But now, over time, and at that time it was considered somewhat axiomatic. But what's happened over time is that the right to exist has meant not just the right to have the territorial integrity respected, but to respect Israel as a Jewish state. And when you ask people, if you ask a Zionist, if you push them long enough in the conversation, or they push you long enough in the conversation, that's what they're saying, right? Does Israel have a right to exist as a Jewish state? That's the whole sentence. Does Israel have a right to exist as a Jewish state? And that's where the conversation gets more complicated. That's where the conversation gets more problematic. Because the answer then becomes no. Because then I have to ask, well, does the United States have a right to exist as a republic? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, does Cuba have a right to exist as a socialist? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Does Saudi Arabia have a right to exist as a monarchy? As an Islamic monarchy, it's etc. Right? What are we talking about when you say it has the right to exist as a Jewish state? And what does it mean to exist as a Jewish state? Again, the superficial mainstream political discourse would have you think that it means a place where Jewish people live, i.e., do Jews have a right to exist? And again, if that were the question, the answer would be yes, of course Jews have a right to exist. All human beings have a right to exist. And the right of Jews to exist should not be seen as less of a priority than anyone else's right to exist. Y'all stay with me, y'all. I'm landing the plane, but just stay with me. So, but that's not what that's not the issue here. Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state is a statement that is made to affirm Israel's right to function as a Jewish ethno-state, to function as a place where people who of a particular ethnic or racial or religious identity have rights that other people do not. that they have freedoms and access that other people do not. It becomes a hierarchy based on one's identity. That is what it means to live in a Jewish ethno-state or any other kind of ethno-state. I'm just saying Israel is a Jewish ethno-state. And so while it is framed as, Israel is a Jewish state that is needed to protect Jewish people, that would make a lot more sense if 20% of the population weren't something other than Jewish and were being denied full rights, freedoms, etc. And then when you look at the fact that Israel has not only created this nation state through expulsion and removal and dispossession, but to also look at the fact that Israel accumulated more land than the UN partition plan allowed for in 1948. And then over the course of war accumulated more. And by 1967, they occupied the West Bank, they occupied the Sinai and the Golan and Gaza, etc. Right? So now Israel is controlling, even if we accepted Israel's territorial integrity, Israel now is controlling other people's land. And since 1967, they've controlled the West Bank, for example. They've controlled East Jerusalem, for example, the longest military occupation in modern history. And so now Israel is functioning as a single state. In other words, people talk about two-state solutions. It's a one-state reality because Israel's not giving it back. They've expressed no intention of giving that land back, even though it's illegally occupied by all international legal standards. So now people who live in East Jerusalem, if someone lives in the West Bank, if somebody lives in Ramallah, for example, they're living in military occupation. They live under Israeli control, except because they don't have Israeli citizenship, cannot have Israeli citizenship, and will not have Israeli citizenship. They live in a system in which they get different rights, different freedoms, different access. They go on different roads. They have different IDs. They get different schools. They get different treatment. If someone in Ramallah gets arrested, they're going to military court. They're not going to the same court as someone who lives in Haifa. So we're talking about an apartheid state. So when people say Israel has a right to exist, if we scratch deep enough, we're talking about Israel's right to exist as an apartheid state. But they hide all that stuff in the mainstream conversation. And by they, I mean Democrats, Republicans, media folk. We just keep saying Israel has a right to exist, Israel has a right to exist, Israel has a right to exist. Ignoring the fact that Israel absolutely, and every nation state, absolutely, every country in the world absolutely does not have a right to exist as an apartheid state. That is a fact. So when Joe says, well, one side doesn't acknowledge the other's right to exist, he's not wrong. Most Palestinians don't accept Israel's right to exist as an apartheid state. That's just not the language that's used, right? And so it sounds like Palestinians just don't want Jews to exist, or they just don't want the people who are currently identified juridically as Israeli to exist. And it's not that. It's that they don't want oppression. They don't want apartheid. And so, yeah, there won't be peace as long as the vision of democracy, the vision of normalcy, the vision of fairness, the vision of justice rests upon Israel existing at the expense of the Palestinian people. That is that's the problem. And so when I hear him say, "Oh, Israel's a miracle," there ain't no miracle. Israel's not a miracle. If I could turn this glass of water into a good glass of sake, which I could use right now, that would be a miracle. If I could turn this into sake, that would be a miracle. But if I go and steal some sake, bring it back to the crib and pour it in his glass. That ain't no miracle. Even if I don't get caught. Now, it might be dope that I don't get caught. It might be like, woo, that was close. But it's not a miracle. If you take people's shit, you accumulate shit. And if people help you take people's shit, then it's easier, right? These aren't miracles. These are conspiracies. These are colonial endeavors. These are projects. And I'm speaking in general terms here. I'm not speaking about Israel right now. I don't think Israel is a conspiracy. To be clear, I do not think Israel is a conspiracy. I think Israel is just a settler colonial project. Israel is no more or less of a settler colonial project than the United States. Israel is no more or less of a settler colonial project than Canada. It's no more of a settler colonial project than Australia. It's no more of a settler colonial. There's lots of settler colonial projects in the world. Israel just is an ongoing one. And that's the dangerous part here. D'Angelo Trevick says, why should there be a religious state? I think, and this is where I would agree with most pro-Israeli people, I don't think Israel is a religious state. I think Israel is a secular state. It has religious sensibilities. It has Jewish cultural, it's shaped around Jewish culture. And the same, I mean, the United States, I wouldn't call it a religious state, but we're still a Christian country. I don't think Israel is a religious state. I think it's much better argument to say Iran is a religious state or Saudi Arabia is a religious state. It's not a religious state. Because, and the reason I say that is because Jewish or Jew as an identity is not reducible or limited to a religious identity, right? You can be a secular Jew. You can be an atheist Jew. So I don't want to reduce Judaism or the Jewish identity to a religion. I think this addendum you put here, a religious or ethnic state, I think that's the point, right? Is that Tuki said it's intrinsically linked to Judaism. Weird take. I don't know if you're saying are you saying my take is weird? I don't think my take is weird. If you're asking me, I think it'd be weird to reduce Israel to a religious state, or to reduce Judaism or Jewish or Jew, whatever word you choose, to reduce those things to religion. Again, I think it's more complex than that. I think if you were to ask the average Zionist what their national identity is, again, you'd have a very interesting question, right? They would say Jewish is their national identity. Again, I had this conversation with he was on the show last week. DeRusso, what's his first name? Well, the brother on last week. When I had him on, we had this conversation, and then someone tried to drag me on Twitter for it, and they had to concede that they were wrong. In Israel, your citizenship is Israeli, but your nationality in the Israeli context is Arab, Druze, or Jew. So even in the context of Israel, Jew is seen as a national identity. Xavier, thank you, Rosability. And so this idea that Jewish is just a religion is very much not how Israel identifies Jewish as an identity. Look at what the Supreme Court decided. They made a decision on this. This isn't my words, it's their words. But talk to any Zionist about this, right? They would tell you that Jew is their national identity, that Jew is their ethnicity. Now, we can have debates about that. We can have conversations about that. We can raise critical questions about that. And I think those are all fair game in a conversation about an ethno state. Bob Warren said Judaism is a religion, so are all Arabs Muslim. Then it's logical. Look, Bob, you're raising an important question and an interesting and smart question. But I do think it's more complicated than that. If you look at how Judaism is formed, and if you look at the word Jew as emerging from Judea, and you see this as, there is an argument, if you're willing to begin from the Bible, with the Bible as a kind of source of Jewish history, and you know, when you engage Jewish studies, I mean, one of the things they'll tell you is, you know, there's an extraordinarily long and complex history of Judaism, but at some point the Bible does become important. And it's hard to make an argument that Jewish is simply a religious practice when you start talking about tribes and you start talking about, again, nations. Muslim was never a nation, but Jew was a nation. Jew was you know, and when you start thinking about the dispersal of Jews throughout the diaspora, it becomes more complicated, because now as the nation state emerges, you have people who are Jews who now live in these other places. I mean, imagine telling a Kurd that they're not, that Kurd is not their national identity, that they're Iraqi or that they're Syrian. They'd say, no, I mean, I live those places, but I am a Kurd. I think, you know, there are many Jews who would identify similarly. Now, I'm not saying that they're the same. It's not my, I'm not entirely easy telling people how they should identify. I don't, you know, that's becomes very messy and nasty work. But what I am saying is that that there are legitimate logical reasons why someone would identify as Jewish beyond a religious identity, even though, again, it gets very complicated. I mean, do I really want to tell somebody who is Beta Israel, somebody who's from Ethiopia, that they are the same ethnic identity as someone from Ukraine, as someone from Brooklyn, as someone from you know, West Africa, Nigeria, maybe, all who have these deep-rooted Jewish identities? I mean, it gets very complicated and messy, you know. And again, that's a conversation to have, but what a conversation that is not to have is that, you know, this right to exist conversation, which I think is overly oversimplified. Mitchell Plitnick and I wrote about this in our book, Except for Palestine. The first chapter deals with the right to exist. And I think it's one that we should take very seriously. I hope you all read that chapter. Chat question, D'Angelo Trowick. I got a question mark. How do we hold Israel accountable without risking our economic and military alliance with Israel? You know, how do we go to heaven without dying is what y'all asking, right? If we believe that Israel needs to be held accountable, why would we not want to risk, or I would argue, disrupt our current economic and military alliance with Israel, right? It's the economic and military alliance with Israel that allows Israel to do the things for which we want them held accountable. In other words, if we weren't giving Israel money and weapons and a political cover, they wouldn't be able to prosecute a war, maybe for a month or 2 or 3 or 4. But there's no way Israel could prosecute a war in Gaza the way they are now, or a genocide in Gaza the way they are now for longer than 3 or 4 months without U.S. support. And that's just a fact. So, to me, that's the answer. You know, stop trying to hold them accountable without disrupting or risking the alliance. The alliance is what needs to be dismantled. Just like the alliance with the United States and Saudi Arabia needs to be dismantled. Just like the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel needs to be dismantled. Just like the relationship, you get what I'm saying? Like, these relationships need to be dismantled. Kathy Morrow, thank you for gifting a membership, everybody. Grab that membership if you didn't already, yo. Isaac MC, thank you for donating a membership. Make sure y'all grab it. Maverick Marty, thank you for grabbing it. Jazz LP, Dallas's Finest, spoke out against what he said about it being a miracle. He says, sir, a miracle? Are you for real, for real? A miracle is when x-rays show cancer all over a person's body, but when they go in for the operation, they find no cancer. Israel is a wicked infidel. A miracle. Powerful words, strong words for sure. Jenny B said, for Mark's patience, because I could never free Philistine from the river to the sea. Again, you know, my patience is not some, it's not like a virtue signal or an attempt to be to vibrate higher or anything like that. It's pedagogical for me. You know, I feel like I can teach more and that people can learn more if I engage civilly and in good faith. but with great patience. And that's the problem with Piers Morgan, is that he doesn't want that. So he's pushing so that you do get hype and turn up. Amos Leak said, thanks, Joe Walsh. Thank Joe Walsh. Honestly, was the Black agenda on the table? And if it isn't, what should Black people do to get support for Blacks in the country? That was a great question that I would love to have heard him get to. Like I said, he logged off before we got to the Q&A part. But I think what Joe would say, based on what I know about him and what I know about Kamala Harris's campaign, he would say there was a Black agenda on the table, and that she had targeted policies for Black people. What I would say in response to what I think he would say and what I know Kamala Harris would say, because she has said it, is that those targeted policies, that many of those targeted policies were also targeted toward other groups, and that they're part of a rising tide kind of logic. That is not to say, though, that many of Kamala Harris's policies, proposed policies, would not have benefited the Black community. They absolutely would have, whether it was job creation, whether it was fighting against the criminalization of like marijuana, whether it was, creating spaces for learning and investment in crypto and things like that, whether it was, health and wellness. There were lots of things that were for Black people. And there were some things targeted toward Black men, even more specifically. And I mentioned one or two of them. So I think she absolutely had plans for Black people. Do I think she was going to sign a reparations bill, which for me would be the real Black agenda, or any other policy that really is exclusively for Black people, and to me, more especially descendants of slavery? No. She said, I'm not going to do something just for Black people, which is unfortunate. But I wouldn't be against it if she were doing it from a Bernie perspective, where, it's like, look, workers unite, stick it to the rich, tax those who aren't paying their fair share, and build something that will ultimately allow for the development of our communities. I could live with that. It wouldn't be my preference. But if Bernie came along and said, I'm going to do all this investment, I'm not going to sign a reparations bill, but I'll do everything else, we would still be light years ahead of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Donald Trump, etc. We'd have to have that conversation when, we'd have to cross that bridge when we got to it, but in terms of voting for him. But at the very least, there would be a real functional economic plan. I thought Bernie's was far more articulate 8 years ago than Kamala Harris's was 8 weeks ago. But, that's just me. Listen to Jewish Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, Nico Peled, or Gideon Levy. By the way, I just interviewed Gideon Levy yesterday, and you should see it on the channel this weekend. You should on Al Jazeera this weekend, excuse me. Stop supporting apartheid and genocide. Listen to Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. It's not anti-Semitism. Bill Williamson also wanted me to ask about LGBTQIA on top of the Israel thing. I think you would have found that Joe is fairly liberal on LGBTQIA plus stuff. That he would have said nothing that would have shocked you on that issue. But the Israel thing is that's where we were about to get into the heavier stuff. I haven't followed the TYT stuff. Of course, he's been on the show before, and I'd love to bring him back, but no, I haven't followed it. I'll see what's up. Sounds like the Young Turks got something interesting going on I don't know about. Based on that, then everyone is African because 1 million years ago we dispersed from Africa, but that's clearly not how the world works except for them. Yeah, but we're talking about 6,000 years, and we're talking about not millions, and we're talking about it in the context of people who are still identified by that thing and even persecuted by that thing. It's not just that Jews are saying, hey, we're Jews. It's that everywhere Jews go, they've been persecuted for their Jewishness. They have been marginalized for their Jewishness. And even when they've attempted to hide their Jewishness, think about this, the Inquisitions, they've still been held accountable, and they've been pogromed, and they've been murdered, they've been genocided for their Jewishness. So, and I'm not saying that oppression is the unifying factor of Jewishness, but there is something to be said for people who, even if they wanted to hide who they were, they would still be marginalized and persecuted if, I mean, think about the conversos, right? I mean, I'm talking about in Spain, right? There were people who did convert. I mean, they were literally force converted. I'm talking about crypto Jews, also known as conversos. There's another word for it in Hebrew, but the point at the end of the day is that even when it came like generation or two later, and these people had converted to Catholicism, they were still persecuted. They were still killed for being of Jewish heritage. So it wasn't like you could perform your way out of it. It wasn't about a kind of orthopraxic religion. Like it wasn't like, oh, if I just do these things and become a Catholic, that I am suddenly now no longer subjected to the persecution of being a Jew. No, they were looking for them. The conversos, they call them in Spain, or that enosim in Hebrew. They were found out and exploited and oppressed and marginalized. This is the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a credible argument for why Jewish people identify as a nation, identify as an ethnic identity. Again, people can have their disagreements about this. It's just not something that I choose to engage, because I think there are bigger fish to fry ideologically and politically than how people choose to identify. For me, the bigger issue is sort of how do we create space for Jewish people to be safe and protected all around the world without creating a state that promotes Jewish supremacy. So that's just me. Jack Mir said, Mark makes you want to have together. No, you don't. Probably don't even need one, y'all. Just keep reading. You know, I got a long way to go myself. So if he brings Ethan Klein out, unsubscribe. I don't even know what y'all talking about over here, but I don't even understand what y'all talking about. But Jewish was a nation state. No, Jewish was never a nation state, but Jewish was a nation. That's the point. Remember, nation states are relatively new. Nation states are like 100 years old, but nations are not. There were Jews long before there was a Jewish state. There were Kurds long before there is no. You get what I'm saying? There is no Kurdish nation state. That's the point. And in fact, when you look after Sykes-Picot, you sort of see what happens when you build a nation state on top of in ways that cut across the geographic dwellings of a nation. Those European colonizers who did the Sykes-Picot didn't care about that. So they didn't care that when they drew them straight lines and gave everybody different maps and colors, they were dividing people they were creating nation states and trying to create these kind of citizenship or national identities based on the nation state that didn't align with people's ethnic and religious identities. And that's what happens. That's how you end up with a Kurdistan that cuts across. This is the point. So no, Jewish was never a nation state, but Jewish was absolutely a nation. And then the Jewish state was an attempt to create a nation state based on those national identities, or based on that national identity. That's the point. That's a great question. Thank you. How's the baby's call? Oh, this is such a sweet question. I really do appreciate the question. Melissa's feeling much better. Melissa's much better. The baby's doing okay. That cough is still crazy, but he doesn't seem to be sick. Melissa's fever broke a couple of days ago, and she's doing much better. She's resting. Thank you for the well wishes, Rosabilly. I appreciate it. You have no idea. Everybody's doing much better. So, do I know who Ethan Klein is? Ethan Klein is an Israeli YouTuber. I don't know anything about him, but I'm not the person to speak to. I guess I'd say, in the most literal sense, I know who he is, but I know nothing about him. So y'all can school me on that, or maybe you can come on here, or oh, y'all saying don't bring them on here. That was the point, right? Tonya Tanika said, found the Tanakh at a thrift store. Had no idea there are 3 books in the Jewish faith. This channel has really expanded how I seek out understanding of others. We can talk about that more. Let's bring an expert in here to talk about Judaism. I think that would be so important. Thank you for your patience and kindness when I'm talking to people with different views. That's why I love you so much more than other lefty live streamers like Hassan Abi. Hassan Abi's my friend. I love Hassan Abi. Shout out to him. By the way, who's your favorite ball player? My favorite ball player right now, and has been for a while, is Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is smart and talented and highly skilled, and a crazy work ethic. He's the real deal, man. One of the most skilled players the NBA's ever seen, if not the most. Any final questions, any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up? We got a couple of questions coming in. Nope, still not coming in. Okay, well, I'm going to call it then, y'all. I appreciate y'all so much. Thanks for watching Night School tonight. We had a great conversation. We learned, of course, as soon as I say that, another one comes in. When he said Israel's a miracle, I subscribe for 1 minute. I love you. I think you mean unsubscribe. I appreciate you, though, Jazz LP. Dallas is finest. Yo, look, it takes all kinds of people. It takes all kinds of people. We just got to be sure that we use the platform to challenge the BS. Again, I don't want to normalize monsters either, but I don't think Joe Walsh is a monster. I think Joe Walsh is just wrong on this issue. And I think it's important to actually convert him sooner than later. So let's try it, y'all. Let's try it. Thank you. Enjoyed the talk with Joe Walsh. I don't think Joe Walsh is insane at all. I think you just don't agree with him. All right, y'all. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the join button. I'm going to say that one more time. Hit the like button. We need you to hit the like button as you watch these videos. Hit the like button. Hitting the like button lets YouTube algorithms know that corporate media is not the only game in town, that we out here and that you're engaging the content. Hit the subscribe button. It gives us a bigger social media footprint so that we can get the content out to more people. And of course, if you're so inclined, hit the join button and become a monthly subscriber to the channel. The channel is going to go through some changes in the next few weeks, the next few months, all good stuff. I think we're going to grow, we're going to expand, we're going to shift, we're going to offer different types of content, more long form essays, video essays. We're going to offer more breaking news. We're going to really get into the Gaza report on top of Night School. We're going to do all kinds of cool stuff, but we need your support financially. Become a member so you can get the exclusive content, you can get the early content, and you can get the extra content. Make sure you do all of that. If you can't make a monthly commitment right now, family, go to the Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle platforms and make a one-time payment. Consider it like tuition for the month. I would love if somebody could donate big as we go into the last 11 days of this month. I mean, we got bills to pay. We're trying to grow. We're trying to expand. We could do that so much easier with your support. So if you don't join, consider dropping something in. I mean, no amount is too big. No amount is too small. If everybody, does their best, we're grateful. If you give $1, we're grateful. If you give $1 million, we're grateful. In fact, if you give $1 million, we'll be extra grateful. I'd love for one person right now tonight to drop in $5,000. There's somebody here who wants to make a once a year donation of $5,000 to the channel. This would be great. Some of y'all might want to do 10,000. Whatever the number is, remember, we're doing this channel to build. We're doing this channel to grow. Night School, office hours, coffee and books, the classroom in the cell, all this stuff, the breaking news, the Gaza report, all this stuff comes with financial support. And we need to plan for another 12 months of this stuff. To do another 12 months of this stuff, we absolutely need your financial support. We absolutely need that. Kenley George just gifted 5 memberships. That is so dope. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Kenley, for donating 5 memberships. Hopefully y'all grabbed them 5 memberships just now. But thank you, family. Again, there's somebody out there who might donate $5,000 or $10,000. Somebody who might give $1,000 right now. If that's what you want to do, If that's what you feel like, yo, do it. But what we're asking for tonight, the actual ask right now, is that if everybody watching right now would donate $10, just 10, or Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, is up. Everyone watching were to donate $10, we would meet our financial goals for the month. Again, if everybody watching were to drop $10, we would meet our financial goals for the month, and we'd be able to start the new year with great momentum for the channel. So just think about it, y'all. I appreciate y'all. I love y'all. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Peace.